Welcome to the Load and Make Ready Bible Study, and we're in Matthew chapter 17. This is our last segment, and it'll be from verses 22 to the end. And so let's just jump right in. So this is the cross denounced again, is what it's titled. Matthew 17, we're going to look at verses 22 to 23, and I'm going to actually read out of the NASB right now, New American Standard Bible. From just this a plug for that Bible that used to be the gold standard for a long time. I think it came out in 1995, and they've had a couple updates, and it was the gold standard for a long time. I like the ESV. They're very similar. ESV is an excellent Bible. They're both very readable, but they have a lot of great, they're understandable, and yet they're word for word. Accuracy is very high. I believe today the gold standard is the LSB, the Legacy Standard Bible, but it's not as easy to read. But a great study tool. Okay, enough said about that. Matthew 17, verse 22. And while they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be handed over to men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were deeply grieved. So Jesus again announces coming death and resurrection. He says he will be betrayed, killed, and raised on the third day. The disciples are deeply distressed, but notice something. They seem to hear the death part more clearly than the resurrection part. And then remember the last time he mentioned that, he had to scold Peter. That is often how we are. Fear hears the bad news louder than faith hears the promise. Fear hears the bad news louder than faith hears the promise. Jesus did not only say, "They shall kill him," he also said, "The third day he shall be raised." But grief grabbed one sentence and dropped the other. Betrayed here is, or delivered up to, is paradidome, to be handed over or deliver up to. The word is important because the word is important because it can refer both to Judas betraying Jesus and to God sovereignly delivering up his son. So we don't necessarily, we think of betrayal as horrible, and most betrayals are, but at the same token, God, he knew what he was doing, and he did this on purpose, and Jesus submitted to it. Human evil and divine purposes met at the cross there. Raised, to awaken, to lift up, to bring about again. So the teaching thought here is Jesus was not surprised by the cross, not at all. As a matter of fact, the Old Testament says that he was going to do it, and God was happy. Jesus was not trapped. He was not outmaneuvered. He was not a victim of circumstances. He walked knowingly toward Calvary. Now, even remember, there are many times they tried to kill him, but they couldn't because his time was not ready. So he got to the cross on his own doing. He got there. Nobody could have rushed it. He knew exactly what was going to happen. The transfiguration shows he had glory. The demon deliverance shows he had power. And the passion predicted shows he had purpose. So the pressure point here is, do not only believe the part of Jesus' words that matches your grief. The disciples heard, what they hear? They will kill him. And sorrow swallowed the words, "He will be raised." Some of us do the same thing. We hear, "This will be hard." But we don't hear, "I will be with you. I'll never forsake you. I'll never leave you." We hear, "You must deny yourself," but not, "You will find life." We hear, "In this world you will have tribulation," but not, "I've overcome the world." Faith listens to the whole sentence. Well, the load here is simple. Learn, obey, apply, and disciple. Learn that Jesus' death was not accidental. It was foretold, purposeful, and redemptive. Obey Christ even when his path includes sorrow before glory. Apply. When God speaks, do not stop listening at the painful part. Hear the promise too. Disciple. Teach believers that Christianity is not denial of suffering. It is hope through suffering, because the resurrection is real and was real. Okay, The next section here, that the book is divided into these sections, is Matthew 17 verses 24 to 27. So this is freedom of humility of sonship. Freedom and humility of sonship. So again, I'm in the NASB for a little bit. Matthew 17 verse 24. Now when they came to Capernaum, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? Now they've arrived at Capernaum. Those who collect the temple tax ask Peter whether Jesus pays it. This is not a Roman tax. This is likely the Jewish temple tax rooted in Exodus chapter 30, and that's found in verses 11 through 16. I'm not going to go into that. Every Jewish male paid this half shekel tax for the service of the tabernacle or slash temple. So Matthew, being a former tax collector, is the only gospel writer who records this miracle. Tribute money is what it's also called. A 2 drachma coin, commonly associated here with the half shekel temple tax, tribute money. So the cross references, and I actually just touched on that a little, it was Exodus chapter 30, but in verse 13, and I won't read it, but it says each Israelite was to give a half shekel as an offering to the Lord. And then Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 32, the people committed to supporting the service of the house of God. Amen. Teaching thought, this passage is not merely about taxes, it's about identity, freedom, humility, and not causing an unnecessary offense. That is interesting. So in verse 25 of Matthew 17, he said, he said yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers? Peter answers, in this verse, Peter answers quickly, yes. Again, Peter speaks before consulting Jesus. When Peter enters the house, Jesus speaks first. See, the King James says Jesus prevented him, meaning Jesus anticipated him or spoke before Peter could bring it up. Jesus asks a question, do earthly kings collect taxes from their own sons or from others? The obvious answer, from others. Kings do not tax their own kids. We collect from others to maintain their own house. The temple is the Father's house. Jesus is the Son of the Father. Therefore, Jesus is not obligated in the same way that you and I would have been obligated at that time, as those others are. So, the tribute, the word is ken, K-E-N-S-O-S, kensos in the Greek, where we get the word census. So as a census tax, a poll tax, or a tribute. The children and the sons are huios. Now this meaning son or a descendant, one having the status of sonship. And that's what a lot of people. Now, Jesus, basically what was just said is Jesus doesn't have to pay the tax because he's the son of the owner of the house. But to avoid an offense, they do. John 2:16, the cross reference. Jesus calls the temple my Father's house. So we know it's his Father's house. Hebrews 3, verse 6. Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. So teaching thought. Jesus is not merely another worshiper in the temple system. He is the son over the house. The temple pointed to him. The sacrifices pointed to him. The whole priesthood pointed to him. The glory belonged to him. Matthew 17, verse 26. And when he said, from others, that was Peter's responding, Jesus said to him, then the sons are free. Then the sons are free. Who were the sons? Jesus makes this point. This is a sonship statement. Then the sons are free, or then are the children free? Jesus is free because he's the Son of the Father. But there is also a secondary principle for believers. In Christ, we are sons by adoption. We are no longer slaves trying to purchase God's favor. We are children received by grace. However, Christian freedom must be governed by love. That is where verse 27 goes next. That word free is long, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it starts again with L, the two-letter word for the name of God. Free, exempt, not bound as a slave. Isn't that interesting? A couple cross-reference scriptures here. Galatians 4, verses 4 to 7. Through Christ, believers received adoption as sons. Romans chapter 8, verses 15 to 17. We have received the spirit of adoption, crying, Abba, Father. It's redundant. Abba's father and father's father. So father, father. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 19. Paul says that though free from all, he made himself servant to all to win more. Little teaching thought. Freedom in Christ is actually very real, but immature believers use freedom to serve others. Immature believers use freedom to serve themselves. They don't serve others, they serve themselves. Mature believers use freedom to serve others. Okay, Matthew 17, verse 27, Jesus still speaking. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. He pays where he doesn't have to for himself, and he pays where he doesn't have to for us. This is one of the most fascinating miracles in Matthew. Jesus says, in effect, we are free, but we will pay it so we do not create unnecessary stumbling block. We are free to do a lot of things, but sometimes that can cause a stumbling block. And most of the time, it's how we do things, unfortunately. Then he tells Peter, go fishing. Hey, the first fish you get, got a coin in his mouth, enough to pay for both of us, Jesus and Peter. This miracle reveals several things. Jesus knows what's in the sea. He knows what's in the air. He knows what's in our heart. He knows what's in our mind. Jesus rules over creation because he created creation. Jesus provides exactly what is needed because he is Jehovah Jireh. The Lord is our provider. Jesus pays for Peter too, and he paid for you and me too. Jesus teaches freedom without arrogance. The last one's huge. Jesus could have refused. He had the theological right, but he chose humility over unnecessary offense. I'm going to just throw this in here because this is what God speaks to me. There are going to be times, and my closest friend Frank and I talk about this all the time. People will judge you by how you give, and it's typically how you tip, T-I-P. When you go out and you tip generously, you're being judged by that. When you tip cheaply or don't tip, you're definitely being judged by that. And then you know when you're being judged the most? On Sunday after church. A minister friend of mine used to say, listen, if you go out and eat and you don't tip at least 20%, and this was about 15 years ago, he said, don't tell him you go to our church. Please don't tell him you go to our church. Money, you and I have been bought with a price. So there's a principle there. I believe we can buy people into the kingdom. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What did you just say, Ernie? Now, hold on. When we tip, when we're generous with what is the currency of the world? Money and the backs of men. When we are generous with the currency, which is the cash, that opens people's hearts, especially when they're expecting something else. It is so sad, and I have heard it, Frank and I, we talk about it, we hear it, where people are very upset with the church crowd because they're cheap. When we have being cheap and being a Christian cannot go together. They cannot go together. Even God gave his own son. God gave another God for our behalf. We better really be careful. So the piece of money, or the hook, is the fish hook, of course, and then the piece of money is called a stater. And it's a coin worth about 4 drachmas, and it's enough for 2 temple tax payments. Makes me want to go fishing, and I'm not a big fisherman, especially before April 15th. So a couple cross-reference scriptures here you can look up. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. Do not let your liberty become a stumbling block to the weak. And you need to look that up. What's my liberty? I can eat meat. There's a lot of people that don't think they can eat certain things. I can. You know, Romans 14, verse 13. Decide never to put a stumbling block in the way of a brother. Well, I can do this. I legally can do this. Okay, great. But if it's going to cause someone to stumble, it's the difference between doing the right thing and doing things right. So Philippians 2, verse 5 to 8. Christ humbled himself, taking the form of a servant. And I think we miss that. We really miss that. Teaching thought. Actually, Pastor Jeff wished that he never received a title, never gave a title. Like Doug and I are the associate pastors. Tyson is the youth pastor. Caitlin is the children's pastor. You know, he never wishes that we had that. We all should have had this. I'm the associate servant. He's the lead servant. I'm the associate servant. Doug's the associate servant. You know, Tyson is the youth servant. You know, I think that we don't put the title of pastor and servant. We don't look at them the same. Okay, so this is not compromise. This is humility. Jesus does not surrender truth. He does surrender his rights, though. This is a major discipleship lesson. There are times to stand firm and refuse compromise. There are also times to willingly limit your liberty so others are not hindered. Wisdom knows the difference. Pray for wisdom. An illustration here is a man may have the right of way at an intersection, but if a truck is running the red light, being right will not keep him from getting flattened. So some Christians are technically right and spiritually reckless. Jesus teaches Peter, being free does not mean being careless. So the load here, the learn, obey, apply, and disciple here is learn that Jesus is the Son over the Father's house, not merely a servant within it. The obey the call to use freedom lovingly, not selfishly. Apply, ask, am I demanding my rights in a way that creates unnecessary stumbling blocks? Disciple, teach others that Christian maturity is not the only knowing what you are free to do, it's knowing when love says, I do not have to insist on this. So the whole chapter summary I want to look at real quick. So Matthew 17 gives us four powerful revelations of Jesus. The first one is Jesus is the glorious Son. The Transfiguration revealed his divine majesty. He's not merely a teacher, a prophet, a reformer, a rabbi, or miracle worker. He is the beloved Son of God. The next one is Jesus must be heard above all others. Remember, Moses and Elijah are important, but the Father says, hear him, meaning Jesus. And it's hear him and obey. We miss that because the translation would actually be hear him and obey. That means Christ has final authority. And then the third one is Jesus has power over darkness. The discipleship failed. Remember, they couldn't do it, but Jesus did not. The demon left because Jesus commanded it. Then the other one is Jesus walks knowingly towards the cross. And here again, he tells his disciples that he's going to be betrayed, killed, and raised. And the last one, Jesus models humble freedom. As the Son, he is free, yet he pays the temple tax to avoid unnecessary offense for himself and for Peter. So, how Matthew 17 points to Jesus. And then we'll end here. The beloved Son, he's affirmed by the Father. He's the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, which was witnessed by Moses and Elijah. The greater Moses, he's the one whom we must hear. The glorious King, revealed in radiant majesty. He's the compassionate deliverer, healing the tormented boy. He's the suffering Messiah, moving toward betrayal, death, and resurrection on purpose. He's the humble Son, free yet willing to serve. And he's the provider, supplying exactly what Peter needed. This chapter says, look at his glory, listen to his voice, trust his power, follow him to the cross, live as a son, but walk as a servant. I look forward to seeing you tonight. Love you all very much. God bless you.